So this is the Anne Boleyn family seed line. Now I've numbered them so you brothers can follow along because it may be a bit small on your side of the screen. So number 1, we have John Boleyn the first. Number 2, Nicholas Boleyn. Number 3, John Boleyn the second. Number 4, Thomas Boleyn the first. Number 5, Geoffrey Boleyn the first. Now from this point on is where the Boleyns started to raise up in the higher echelons of English nobility. But we're going to specifically follow the seed line that leads up to Anne Boleyn. So number 6, Sir Geoffrey Boleyn II, Lord Mayor of London. Number 7, Sir William Boleyn, Sheriff of Kent, Norfolk and Suffolk, who married a noble woman, Lady Margaret Butler. Now her father was Thomas Butler, who was the 7th Earl of Ormond. And from them two, this is where we get the mother and father of Anne Boleyn. So number 8, we have Sir Thomas Boleyn, 1st Earl of Wiltshire and Ormond, who married Elizabeth Howard, who was the Countess of Wiltshire. And from them two, this is where we get Anne Boleyn. And of course, from Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, this is where we get Elizabeth I. So brothers, before we continue on, I just want to highlight this dude here. So this dude here was Sir Thomas More, who came from a noble family of lawyers and judges. Now this dude was Chancellor of England to Henry VIII. But you might be asking yourself, why am I highlighting him? Well, the reason why I'm highlighting him, brothers, is because of his name, Thomas More. Well, first and foremost, you already know this image right here is a fabricated, whitewashed version. But the reason why I'm highlighting him, as I stated, is because of his name, Thomas More. One of the best indicators to tell who was so-called black in history, just look at their names. The fact that this dude has More in his name, you already know he was a so-called black man. No matter how that word is spelled, if it's spelled M-O-R-E, if it's spelled M-O-U-R, if it's spelled M-O-H-R, if it's spelled M-U-U-R. But we're going to prove that even further. So brothers, this is the memorial of Sir Thomas More. So we're going to read it real quick. So it reads, "Beneath this floor is the vault of the Roper family, in which is interred the head of Sir Thomas More, of illustrious memory, sometime Lord Chancellor of England, who was beheaded on Tower Hill, 6th of July, 1535. So brothers, what I want you to take away from this, remember the date 1535 and remember the coats of arms that are on top. Okay, brothers, so look at the coats of arms on top and remember the date 1535. So this is the coats of arms of Sir Thomas More. So brothers, remember how I told you to remember the shield and remember the date 1535. So as you can see within the coats of arms is a head of a so-called black man. So the age-old question once again, why would you have a black man representing your coats of arms? Now they're going to tell you that this is just a conquered African slave that they put on their coats of arms, but that in and of itself doesn't even make any sense because a coat of arms represents a family's seed line, a family's heritage. Once again, brothers, this is Thomas More, not that fabricated whitewash version that we just saw. And this is how the rest of the nobles of Europe looked, and the majority of the population in Europe, I should say. But we're going to get even further proof. So this is another variation of the More coats of arms. And as you can see, it's the same shield. And on top of the shield is the so-called black man with the golden hoop earring. The golden hoop earring is also another great indicator to tell if somebody was so-called black in history, because this is how the black man used to style himself, especially in Europe. Heck, even my avatar picture has the black man with the golden hoop earring in it. So now we're going to put the nail in the coffin and Sir Thomas More. So this is from the book Nature Knows No Colour Line. And on the top it says, the Moors of Yorkshire, Negroes in coats of arms of noble families. So at the bottom it reads, British families, top left, the Moors of Yorkshire, including Sir Thomas More, Chancellor of Henry VIII. Once again, Thomas More was a so-called black man, just like the rest of them. So back to the Boleyns, I'm going to provide a bit of information on the father of Anne Boleyn. So Thomas Boleyn, 1st Earl of Wiltshire, 1st Earl of Ormond, 1st Viscount Rochford of Hever Castle in Kent, was an English diplomat and politician who was the father of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, and was thus the maternal grandfather of Queen Elizabeth I. By Henry VIII, he was made Knight of the Garter in 1523 and was elevated to the peerage as Viscount Rochford in 1525, and in 1529 was further ennobled as Earl of Wiltshire and Earl of Ormond. Now, of course, later on, he was stripped of his title. His family was shamed because of the accusations of Anne Boleyn that she had an incestuous relationship with her brother. She was conspiring a treasonous plot to kill the king, and she committed adultery. So now we get to Anne Boleyn. So we're going to read a little synopsis about the life of Anne Boleyn. So Anne Boleyn was Queen of England from 1533 to 1536 as the second wife of King Henry VIII. The circumstances of her marriage and her execution by beheading for treason and other charges made her a key figure in the political and religious upheaval that marked the start of the English Reformation. Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, 1st Earl of Wiltshire, and his wife Lady Elizabeth Howard, and was educated in the Netherlands and France, largely as maid of honour to Queen Claude of France. Anne returned to England in early 1522 to marry her Irish cousin James Butler, 9th Earl of Ormond. The marriage plans were broken off, and instead she secured a post at court as a maid of honour to Henry's wife, Catherine of Aragon. Speaking of Catherine of Aragon, let's go get her. So brothers, I already know a lot of you guys know who this is in this portrait. But why am I bringing this out, you ask? One of the favourite things the elite Caucasians love to do, they like to take the real images of the kings, queens, noblemen, dukes, so on and so forth, and title them as African slaves. For example, this portrait here, they've tried to say that this is the bodyguard of Charles V. This is not the bodyguard of Charles V. This is Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. And as you can see, he has the Habsburg's jaw. Now, for those who don't know, the Habsburg's jaw is basically a deformity that comes from a lot of inbreeding, because the Habsburgs were known for marrying nieces and nephews, aunts, uncles, so on and so forth, and this was one of the main defects in the Habsburgs family seed line. And isn't it funny? You're telling me that the bodyguard of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V also seems to have the Habsburg's jaw. Isn't that a coincidence? But once again, brothers, why am I bringing this out? So remember what I stated. What they do, they take the real images of the kings, queens, dukes, noblemen, princesses, so on and so forth, and retitle them as African slaves or African bodyguards. So we're going to check something. So brothers, peep this portrait right here. So now we're going to read a little excerpt from the Real History WW. So it reads, Portrait of a black woman holding a clock, previously owned by the Italian painter Carlo Maratti, named named in his inventory as above. This close-up is a part of a larger painting which has not been made available for public viewing. Now, I wonder why that is. So, upon acquisition by the Walters Art Museum for the exhibit, The African Presence in Renaissance Europe, the name of the painting, now peep this, brothers, the name of the painting was changed to Portrait of an African Slave Woman. Now, brothers, remember what I stated? They take the real images of the kings, queens, noblemen, dukes, so on and so forth, and retitle them as African slaves. So, going on that whitewash narrative, they've also stated that this is the black African slave of Catherine of Aragon. So, most likely, brothers, what you are looking at is the real image of Catherine of Aragon. But look how they've cut off this image, brothers. Look how they've framed this portrait. As you can see, it gives off the illusion that this quote-unquote black African slave woman is being accompanied by her white slave master. These are the type of manipulative illusions that they create to whiten out history. So, brothers and sisters, think about all the paintings or images that you've seen of so-called black people in Europe. You don't know who the heck you could have looked at. You could have looked at the real images of Beethoven, Mozart, King Edward, King Charlemagne, Edward the First, Edward the Second, King John, so on and so forth, and you don't even know it. They're just going to title it an African in Europe or an African slave. And most likely, brothers, the person next to her, it could be Henry VIII, or maybe even her father. Speaking of her father, let's go get him. Brothers, one of the best ways to prove if somebody was so-called black in history, all you got to do is follow the seed line and see if you can find some historical documentation on that person. So we're going to check something out. So now we're going to read the physical description of King Ferdinand, Catherine of Aragon's father. So he, a man of middle stature, well built, well formed face, and all of his limbs, of smiling, clever, dark eyes, sensual lips, black hair, and suave complexion, for the ladies and gentlemen in the back, suave complexion. He was raised on wars, earning his experience and reputation of a warrior and later turning out to be the first king soldier of his times. Strong, courageous, persistent, manipulative, but also sympathetic and kind. He was believed to be the best diplomat and politician and soldier of the late 15th centuries. Highly charming, when anyone talked to him, they came to love him at once. A great fan of sports and board games, seductive, a notorious womanizer. At the age of 17, before getting married to Isabella, he already had 3 illegitimate children by 2 different women. Discreet, passionate, but also calculative, realist. The matter of the state came first. He always loved Isabella, but he never lost his mind for her. Yes, brothers, that Ferdinand and Isabella, the same one who persecuted the Jews, aka the Israelites. Brothers, sisters, they were all the same people. A lot of you brothers and sisters in the knowledge, and when I'm talking about the knowledge, I'm talking about so-called black people knowing that they are the Israelites of the Bible. A lot of you guys think that Isabella and Ferdinand were so-called white and they were the ones who persecuted the Jews. Nah. They were all the same people, brothers. This is why I make statements like the black nobles. They were the forefront and the main leaders that led the slave trade. They led the slavery laws. All of the colonization was done by the black nobles. This is why I make statements when you had the black Europeans going over to the Americas, colonizing it. You had the black Europeans versus the black Aboriginals. So I'm sure a lot of you brothers and sisters already know about Isabella and Ferdinand, but I'm going to go over it real quick. So roughly 2 months after the final expulsion of the Muslims in Spain, on March 31st, 1492, Isabella, Isabella I of Castile, and Ferdinand of Aragon promulgated the Alhambra Decree, ordering the expulsion of Jews from the Kingdom of Spain and its territories and possessions in by July 31st, 1492. Hostility towards the Jews. Now, when they're talking about the Jews, they're not talking about those people over there currently in the land of Israel. We know who they're talking about. So, hostility towards the Jews was brought to the climax during the reign of the Catholic monarchs, and that was the main issue. They were following Roman Catholicism. Once again, our people were beefing with each other, but I'm going to get into that later. Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, their marriage in 1469, which formed a personal union of the crowns of Aragon and Castile, with coordinated policies between their distinct kingdoms, eventually led to the final unification of Spain. Although their initial policies towards the Jews were protective, Ferdinand and Isabella were disturbed by reports claiming that most Jewish converts to Christianity were insincere in their conversion. As mentioned above, some claims that conversos continued to practice Judaism, aka following the laws of the Torah, in secret, crypto Judaism. And this is how our people were beefing with each other, fighting over money, power, land inheritance rights, the right to sit on the throne, natural resources, the different religious factors they were part of, like Roman Catholicism, being a Protestant, being a Christian, being a humanist, which led to our people enslaving each other, persecuting each other, killing each other, so on and so forth. This is, brothers, this is why I make statements about the black nobles coming over to the Americas and colonizing it. I think I already talked about that. I think I already talked about that before, because this is a separate recording. I can't remember if I've already stated that, but I'm gonna say it again just in case I didn't. This is why in my videos I make statements like you had the black nobles coming over to the Americas and colonizing the Americas, enslaving some of the Aboriginal Americans. You had the black Europeans beefing with the other black Europeans. You had the different Aboriginal tribes beefing with the Aboriginal tribes. All of the different slavery laws and the slave trade was led by the black nobles. This is why I make my statements that I do. When you see so-called black, if you see a black family picking cotton, a black slave family picking cotton, that doesn't necessarily mean that black slave family is owned by Caucasians. That black slave family could be owned by other so-called black people. You understand? Now, don't get it twisted. This does not nullify all the atrocities that have been done by the other nations of people. But this was one of the major climaxes that led to our downfall, and all of this is prophesied. You know, your eyes should be evil towards your brother, mother against father, because our people went off in idolatry. The Most High struck them with madness, so on and so forth. And once again, the earth is given into the hands of the wicked. Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is it that followeth. Once again, Esau has to be ruling before Yahushua returns. But this is one of the main factors of how prophecy played out in real time. And this is how the Caucasians swooped in and took over. But there's more nuance to it, but you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So shout out to the brothers on the Discord. So this is a coin of King Ferdinand II of Aragon. So brothers, remember what I stated. If you want to find out if somebody was so-called black in history, follow this seed line. So King Ferdinand II of Aragon, his daughter was Catherine of Aragon, and his grandson was Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. So Catherine of Aragon's nephew was Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V's aunt was Catherine of Aragon. Follow the seed line. So back to Anne Boleyn, starting from the second paragraph. Early in 1523, Anne was secretly betrothed to Henry Percy, son of Henry Percy, 5th Earl of Northumberland, but the betrothal was broken off when the Earl refused to support their engagement. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey refused the match in January 1524, and Anne was sent home to Hever Castle. In February or March 1526, Henry VIII began his pursuit of Anne. She resisted his attempts to seduce her, refusing to become his mistress, and as her sister Mary has previously been, Henry soon focused his desires on annulling his marriage to Catherine so he would be free to marry Anne. And this was one of the main factors that led to the English Reformation, by the way, because he needed an excuse to annul his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. But the Pope and his cardinals, they did have too much power. They were like the only personage that were allowed to read the Bible. And we all know that the Pope and the cardinals and the Catholic, just Catholicism in general, it's just a bugged out religion, bugged out doctrine. Huge idol worship in Catholicism. They love worshiping dead saints and relics and statues, so on and so forth. The Pope has nothing to do with Yahweh or Yahweh. They worship pagan gods behind the scenes, and they use the Bible as a front. That's why, if you wonder why why do so much children get abused by Catholic priests, you have to understand that the gods that they worship the half man, the half goat, or as you guys should know it as the Baphomet. You know, the woodland god that leads little boys to the woods and has, intercourse with them. This is why so much children get abused by Catholic priests, because of the gods that they worship. They have to appease to them. So let's continue on. So focus his desires on annulling his marriage to Catherine so he would be free to marry Anne. Wolsey failed to obtain an annulment of Henry's marriage from Pope Clement VII, and in 1529 to 1530, Anne helped bring about his downfall and his death. When it became clear that Clement would not annul the marriage, Henry and his advisors, such as Thomas Cromwell, began the breaking of the Catholic Church's power in England and closing the monasteries and the nunneries. Henry made Anne the Marquess of Pembroke in 1532. Henry and Anne formally married on the 25th of January 1533, after a secret wedding on the 14th of November 1532. On the 23rd of May 1533, the newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, declared Henry and Catherine's marriage null and void. 5 days later, he declared Henry's and Anne's marriage valid. Shortly afterwards, Clement excommunicated Henry and Cranmer. As a result of this marriage and these excommunications, the first break between the Church of England and Rome took place, and the king took control of the Church of England. Anne was crowned Queen of England on the 1st of June 1533, and on the 7th of September she gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I. Henry was disappointed to have a daughter rather than a son, but hoped a son would follow and professed to love Elizabeth. Anne subsequently had 3 miscarriages, and by March 1536, Henry was courting Jane Seymour. In order to marry Seymour, Henry had to find reasons to end the marriage to Anne. The very same thing he did with Catherine is the very same thing he did with Anne. So, Henry VIII had Anne investigated for high treason. In 1536, on the 2nd of May, she was arrested and sent to the Tower of London, which she was tried before a jury of peers including Henry Percy, her former betrothed, and her uncle Thomas Howard, the 1st Duke of Norfolk. She was convicted on the 15th of May and beheaded 4 days later. Modern historians view the charges against her, which included adultery, incest, and plotting to kill the king, as unconvincing. After her daughter Elizabeth was crowned as queen in 1558, Anne became venerated as a martyr and a heroine. of the English Reformation, particularly through the written works of John Fox. She has inspired or been mentioned in many artistic and cultural works and retained her hold on the popular imagination. She has been called the most influential and important consort England has ever had, as she provided an occasion for Henry VIII to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and declared um, the English Church independence from the Vatican. The Anne Boleyn TV series. So I told you, brothers, for those of you that have watched my Meaning of Words video, I told you that they're going to sneak truth in the background. I told you to pay attention to all the extras, the people, the paintings on the wall, the statues, the garments, so on and so forth, because they're going to show or reveal the black presence in Europe. So we're going to take a look at a few images that I managed to snipe from this TV series, and we're going to analyze them real quick. So this is an image of a royal guard or knight of Henry VIII. This image of this woman is one of the ladies of the chamber to Anne Boleyn. This image is one of the Black Lords or the Lords of the Realm. Here's another image of one of the Lords of the Realm. Here's another royal guard. I had to snipe this one because this one was in the corner. Here's another royal guard of Henry VIII. Here's another Lord of the Realm in the court of Henry VIII. And this scene was where Anne Boleyn was on trial. Here's another Lord on the realm. Now in this part they purposely zoomed in on this dude for about 3-4 seconds because they wanted you to see him. And this is another Lord that was in the court of Henry VIII, where Anne Boleyn was on trial, I should say. So here's Anne Boleyn, her brother George Boleyn, and another royal guard of Henry VIII. Here's a trumpeter of Henry VIII. Now we already know about the trumpeter. They love to say, oh yeah, Henry VIII did have one black African trumpeter. You know, see this image? This is the image that they usually show, talking about Henry VIII had one black African trumpeter, as if they all weren't so-called black. So now, brothers, this is a YouTube video of where this woman goes to Hever Castle and she gets a tour of the castle. Now she stumbles across this tapestry and this dude states that this is Mary, King Henry's sister, and King of France's marriage. So pay attention to this tapestry. Now, of course, this is a fabricated whitewash version. Either this is a real tapestry that they've just whitenized, or it's a complete remodel, a whitewash version. But pay attention to the art style of this tapestry, okay? So, brothers, look at the tapestry that's behind Anne Boleyn in the TV series. Now, as you can see, they got the black man on this tapestry decked out, regally decked out. It wouldn't shock me one bit if this is the real authentic tapestry that they got from the museum or that they got from Hever Castle, and they decided to put this in the TV series because people are going to think that they created this image for the sake of the TV show. These are the type of images that they hide under the Vatican, under high Ivy League schools, or they hide in the museum where the public is not allowed to see, and only the high-ranking historians are allowed to see these authentic images. But I told you that they were going to sneak these type of things in this TV show because I know how they operate. This is how they mock so-called black people. So this is it, brothers. This is the creme de la creme. This is the punchline. This is how we're going to bring it home. This is probably the main reason why you guys clicked on this video. So now we're going to read historical documentation of the complexion of Anne Boleyn. So we're going to start it off with this article here. So it reads, known actresses who have played Anne Boleyn: Merle Oberon, Dorothy Tootin, Natalie Portman, and Natalie Dormer, have black or dark brown hair. Now you see, they're making it a haircut. They're making it a hair color thing, not a skin complexion thing. And all of these actresses are not the best physical depiction of Anne Boleyn. The best physical description of Anne Boleyn is Jodie Turner-Smith. But let's continue on. So have black or dark brown hair. Dormer dyes hers, and modern portraits and cartoons follow the prototype of Anne as a raven-haired. Now, once again, they're still making a hair thing. Temptress. Yet the portraits and representation that have been judged to bear the closest resemblance to the historical Anne, including the National Portrait Gallery painting, shows her with auburn hair, and that painting is complete fabrication. So with auburn hair, this isn't incompatible with the many descriptions of her as dark. Once again, her as dark. For in an aesthetic religious world which divided things into light and dark. Now you see what they're doing here, brothers. This is them throwing in their false narratives in. Brothers, these historians know the complexion of Anne Boleyn. There are so much description, physical description of the complexion of Anne Boleyn, that there's no way that they haven't come across it. But this is why they have to come up with narratives when it's talking about black. Or if it's talking about black, it's talking about how evil they are. If it's talking about dark, it's talking about the countenance of their character. If it's talking about black, it's talking about their hair color. If it's talking about black, it's talking about the clothes that they're wearing. These are the type of whitewash, fabricated narratives that they have to come up with to try and explain away any historical documentation describing a historical figure as a so-called black man or black woman. But we're going to read on. So it describes it as dark for an aesthetic religious world which divided into light and dark. You wouldn't have to have jet black hair to be in the dark category. So let's read on. In fact, there are only two descriptions of Anne from roughly her own time period which associated Anne with the color black. One more time, which associated Anne with the color black. One is from the Catholic propagandist Nicholas Sander, who was born after Anne died and was clearly out to make Anne sound as witch-like as possible, with an extra digit, a huge wart, and other deformities that would surely, if true, have eliminated Anne from Henry's list of marriageable ladies. The other is Cardinal Wolsey, private nickname the Night Crow. Once again, the Night Crow, a metaphor which cannot be taken physically descriptive. Now, brothers, you see what they're doing? They're going to tell you the reason why she was called a Night Crow is because she was evil. So once again, brothers, dodge the narrative, but let's read on. So the Night Crow, a metaphor which cannot be taken physically descriptive. All other sources describes her as dark or brunette. And brothers, if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you go watch my meaning of words video before you continue watching this video, because it's important for you to know the meaning of words and how it was used in certain time periods. So when we read historical documentation like this, you have a greater understanding of what you're listening to or of what you're reading. So dark or brunette. Brunette translates to brown for us, but may have had a much broader reference then, because back then brunette meant a woman of a dark complexion, aka a so-called black woman. But you see what they've done? They've taken out the skin complexion component out. Now when you think of the word brunette, you think of just brown hair. This is what they do. They change the meaning of words to hide history. So Anne was, according to contemporary sources, not a conventional beauty. One member of Henry's court wrote that Anne was not one of the most handsomest women in the world. She had a swarthy complexion. She had a swarthy complexion. She had a swarthy complexion. Long neck, wide mouth, bosom not much raised, and in fact had nothing but the king's great appetite, and her eyes, which are black and beautiful and take great effect. Her biographer, Eric William Ives, has claimed her complexion was sallow. Her complexion was sallow. Her complexion was sallow. And she was noted only for her magnificent dark hair, her expressive eyes, and her elegant neck. Not one of the handsomest women in the world, she is of middle stature, swarthy complexion, swarthy complexion, swarthy complexion, long neck, wide mouth, a bosom not much raised, and eyes which are black and beautiful. Simon Griney, I probably pronounced that completely wrong, a professor of Greek at Basel, describes her complexion as rather dark. Her complexion as rather dark. Her complexion as rather dark. The historian Alison Plowden, after studying all the evidence, has pointed out certainly Anne was not beautiful in any obvious sense. A brunette, brunettes, a brunette with a heavy mane of glossy black hair, a sallow skin, sallow skin, sallow skin, and a rather flat-chested figure. Her best feature seems to have been her large dark eyes. She dressed well and had become a leader of fashion at court. Anne Boleyn was rather tall of stature, with black hair and an oval face, of sallow complexion, sallow complexion, sallow complexion. Biographical information of Anne Boleyn: status, deceased, executed by decapitation, also known as Marquess of Pembroke, the Black Crow, the Black Crow by Thomas Wolsey. Anne had a fine singing voice and expertise at dance. She was also an accomplished musician, skillfully playing the lute, the virginals, and the rebec. Anne spoke and wrote in French and spoke Latin, although to what extent is debatable. Therefore, we can gather from the evidence that Anne was slim, of dark complexion, that Anne was slim, of dark complexion, with a long oval face and high cheekbones. She had long dark hair and beautiful, expressive dark, almost black eyes. So, brothers, once again, if you haven't watched it, please go watch my meaning of words video before you watch any other of my videos. But we're going to quickly go over the words that were used to describe the complexion of Anne Boleyn. So we're going to start off with the word sallow. Sallow, Old English sallow, dusky, dark. Swarthy, dark colored, especially of skin. Once again, swarthy, dark colored, especially of skin. The word brunette, of a woman dark in complexion, having a brownish tone to the skin and hair. 1660s from French brunette, femme or brunette, from Old French brunette, brownish, brown haired, dark complexioned. Let's skip down. As a noun, woman with dark hair and eyes and of a dark complexion. So once again, Anne Boleyn was a so-called black woman. Just like the rest of the ruling class in Europe and the majority of the population during this time period. So-called black people, you are the original Europeans. This is why a lot of you have European names. You did not get your names from your white slave master. So-called black people have ruled Europe for thousands of years. So-called black people ruled Europe all the way back to early 100 AD, all the way up to the late 1800s. And of course, prior to that in the ancient world. You should know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Do not allow these other races and demographics ever to teach you your history. Hopefully this was an edifying lesson for you brothers and sisters, giving all praises to the Most High Yahweh and giving acknowledgement to Hamashiach Yahushai.